Hello, friends, and welcome back to the channel where it's all real, unexplained experiences from real people all the time. Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got two compelling and fascinating Bigfoot or Sasquatch experience stories to share with you. The first was emailed to me from a viewer, and the second was forwarded to me from the lovely and talented Kitty from Pinebox Tales. So I'm excited for these two cryptid sighting stories. Let's not waste any more time. Grab your gear and let's ride to Sasquatch country. Number 1. Dear Tattooed Biker, I'm in South Florida now, but I spent most of my life in Pennsylvania, and I have an experience that happened there I'd like to share with you and your viewers. We were at an out-of-the-way area along Racedown Lake in Huntingdon County, and we'd be camping out, and we weren't looking for Bigfoot. It was spring of 2022. I didn't even know, didn't stand up and move around. We soon realized that it wasn't a person. I went down to get a closer look, and when I got down to the water's edge, it stood up, and it was huge and massive. I couldn't tell, but it was a creature. I couldn't see distinct detail, but it was a really large creature that was shaped roughly like a man. I strained to get a better look because I just couldn't believe what I was looking at. And I was probably like 40 feet from it. I was kind of hiding behind some brush and stuff. I stepped on a twig, and in an instant, it headed out of the water, probably 30 feet from shore and in a mucky mud environment. In 3 to 4 feet of water, you'd usually strain and struggle to get out of that water. It just moved out like it was a bird skimming over the top. Just instantly, it was out of the water and up onto the bank. When it reached the shore, it quickly walked into the forest. It had 2 large fish, looking like catfish, by the mouth in each hand. Thanks for reading. Signed, Tom. Number 2. My family originates from Guadalajara, Mexico. My parents, my brother, and I came to the U.S. in the late 90s. At the time of our experience, my brother was about to turn 14 in a few weeks, and I was going to be 13 soon. My birthday was a month after my brother's. Back then, Mom worked 7 days a week as a hotel housekeeper, and my dad did anything and everything that he could find. I was too young to know it at the time, but my parents were working, not only to feed and house us, but they were also saving a little bit at a time, so one day they could open a restaurant. As you know, they achieved their dream of starting a restaurant. I'm extremely proud of my parents and grateful for all of their hard work and sacrifice. Our first 15 years in the U.S., we lived in 29 Palms, California. I remember how we looked out when we could see the mountains, and I remember how my brother and I talked all the time about those mountains. We were obsessed. Our parents worked so much, and when they weren't working, they were helping us with school stuff, or they were exhausted. Because my parents were so focused on building a better life for us, my brother and I never thought that we'd get to go anywhere besides our own street. There were a few times that my parents splurged on tickets for something fun, like a day at the amusement park, or they'd take us to the beach or something. But my brother and I, we really wanted to visit those mountains and go camping. But my parents worked so much, we never believed we'd ever get to do that. I don't know why, but my brother and I seemed to be obsessed with the outdoors, nature, and wanting to go hiking and camping. I guess my parents caught on to our obsession. Unbeknownst to my brother and I, our parents had been working on putting together a little family vacation for us. When they finally announced their plans, my brother and I squealed like 2 little girls. I'm sure my parents regretted telling us, because we didn't shut up about it until the day it finally came. My parents had never taken any time off work, so this was a really big deal. We would go camping and exploring in the mountains on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday in late May. My parents planned our trip, and we got some camping gear, and my dad was able to borrow this pull-behind camper, so we would have more shelter and a bit of comfort. My brother and I thought that we were going somewhere not far from where we lived, but our parents surprised us. We were going to make the drive to Chino Hills National Park, which was nearly a 3-hour drive. When we arrived, we set everything up, and my mom started making us some food. My dad pulled both of us aside and gave us a lengthy and stern lecture about not wandering off by ourselves, and other things that were safety concerns in the wilderness. So Friday evening, we had to stay close by the campsite. My dad said it just wasn't a good idea to go out exploring, as it would be dark in a couple hours. The next morning, we were more than ready to go. My mom stayed at the campsite while my dad, my brother, and I went and walked the different trails for hours on Saturday, and then again on Sunday. We would walk for hours, going back to the campsite for lunch and then back out again. We were all having a great time, and my dad seemed to be really enjoying it too, even if he had a bit of a hard time keeping up with us. But my mom, well, I could tell you that this wasn't her idea of a fun vacation. But she knew how obsessed my brother and I were, so I adore her for putting on a good front and acting like she was enjoying it. On Sunday, she even came out walking with us for a few hours. We knew that we'd have to leave the next day. It was now Sunday, and it was after dinner, so I doubted our parents would let us go out exploring one more time. It would be dark in a few hours. My brother and I were shocked when both of my parents said yes, and both agreed that we would all go out walking. But once it got dark, we'd have to turn back. And Dad told us to take flashlights, just in case. So we went on a trail that was a bit further away from our campsite. It was one we hadn't walked since we got there. We were thinking about how quiet it seemed compared to our other times out hiking. We wondered out loud if it was because it was later in the day or because of the trail that we were on. My dad seemed, well, different. He wasn't himself. He was quiet and seemed on edge. I asked him if he was okay, and he said he was, but he was listening because the way it was so quiet had him wondering if a mountain lion might be around. I remember him saying that it wasn't right to not be able to hear the birds. It was very quiet the entire time that we were out walking, and I don't know if what my dad said was bothering me, or if I just began to feel something on my own. But suddenly I said, "Do you think maybe it's time that we headed back?" My brother's eyes got huge, and he looked like he was going to kill me. But I couldn't help it. I felt like something was just wrong. Dad was right, it was too quiet. My dad said it was maybe too early to hear owls, but there were other things that we should have heard. I couldn't tell you why, but I was feeling anxious. My feelings of fear were getting so bad that I felt like I was going to start crying. I was so happy when my mom said it was time to start heading back. I felt a bit of relief wash over me like a cup of hot chocolate on a cold night. We were heading back, and I was leading the way. It would take about an hour to get there, but at least we were leaving. We had walked for about 15 or 20 minutes when we all started hearing the sounds. It was a mix of grunts, growls, and yelps. I never saw my dad look the way he did just then. He looked like he might crap his pants from fright. My brother actually started to stutter and ask, "What was that?" My mom just said, "Let's get out of here." My dad composed himself and told us not to run, but to quicken our pace. We were moving quickly for another 15 or 20 minutes, and I was hoping we were getting closer to the end of the trail, but I really couldn't tell. Suddenly, we heard noise behind us, and this time the grunts were followed by the screams of a demon. Then we caught sight of it, this giant beast. It was big as hell. I would say that it was 3 feet, bigger than my dad, and He's 6'1". It had a lot of long, light brown hair, and the hair looked long and thick, and its whole body was covered in it. Even with all that hair, you could see the massive muscles this thing had, and it stunk. At least I think it was that thing. We suddenly smelled a really nasty odor, and I can't imagine how bad it would smell close up. I had no idea what it was. We had all paused to stare at this thing for at least a few seconds. My dad's voice set us off running. He yelled, "Go, go." He knew my brother and I were fast, but he was rightfully worried about my mom being able to keep up. The thing didn't attack us, but it didn't stop following us until we were off the path and running out into the clearing. We got to our campsite and we looked for a long time, but it never came out of the woods. My mom ran over to the couple that was camping nearby. She had talked to them several times and had gotten to know them pretty well. They came back with my mom, and they were telling us about the legend of the Yucca Man. Yucca Man is what some people call the beast that roam all over, from the Mojave Desert to other places, like 29 Palms, Joshua Tree, and other areas in the region. Nobody knows whether it's one or many, and some people say that it's got supernatural powers. They told us that it's either the same or similar to Bigfoot. They had heard some stories of other sightings, but never saw anything themselves. They told us that they 100% believe now because they could hear the screams of that thing all the way at their campsite. My brother and I never asked to go camping after that. Amusement parks and the beach just seemed a lot safer. That was my family's only experience, but I think that one is plenty. This next story is a bonus story that I decided to include because, well, I received it after recording on this video had already begun, but I just found it too interesting not to include. So here goes. Dear Tattooed, I've had some experience with what you refer to as Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and I'd like to share what's been going on. It started around Thanksgiving 2019. I live in rural Catawba County, North Carolina. I got home from work to find my brother and nephew sitting in their truck in the backyard next door. I started walking over to ask what they were up to when a rotten odor nearly gagged me. It smelled like raw flesh and the wet hair of a mangy animal. I then heard a low-toned growling or moaning coming from the tree line. I immediately joined them in the truck. We listened to it for maybe an hour. At times it was so loud that we could almost feel the vibrations from it. We could tell where the thing was, but we couldn't see far enough into the brush to get any kind of visual. It was dusk when this started, now dark. It paced the wooded area behind our houses several times before finally fading away. None of us had an explanation nor volunteered to take to the woods with a flashlight. The very next night, the same thing happened again. My brother was prepared with a spotlight, but when we tried to shine it, all went silent for the night. We were sure it was over for good, but we were wrong. I got home early on the third day and was met by a farmer who lives on the opposite side of the highway from us. He told me that he was cutting weeds from his back pasture when a large piece of wood was thrown at him. He wanted me to go over and pick up the equipment he had left behind. He was very clearly upset, and he visited for a while, and we told him about our experience. Luckily for all of our egos, our smelly friend made one final show. We heard a growl just like that in the last 2 evenings, and our farmer friend did something that we hadn't thought of. He yelled back at it. The vocalization immediately changed from grunting into loud, high-pitched yodeling screams, as if it was trying to answer. The thing obviously started running away, but continued this whooping sound. This was the first time we heard actual footsteps, and I'm sure it was bipedal as it sounded like a human running and pushing branches away as it went. My brother had a group of 5 girlfriends of his daughter staying with him at the time. He joked that all 5 plus his wife must have been on their time of the month. He was more comfortable taking his chances with Bigfoot than going in the house with those women. A neighbor, also a witness, theorized that it was the girl's condition that attracted the Bigfoot in the first place. I thought he made sense, but I didn't bring it up. While we couldn't claim to be eyewitnesses, I was soon approached by a guy who occasionally worked for me. His brother and 3 co-workers from a local construction company were headed home from work, and when nearing my house, the driver blurted out, "Look at that monkey." He stopped the truck as the creature crossed the road, at about a 50-yard sprint. After a moment of silence, he remembered saying, "There aren't any monkeys here." He described it as over 6 feet tall, dark in color, mangy and lanky. None of them knew of my recent experience, so this was pretty amazing for me to hear. Yet another community member came forth after that. A farmer lady who lives just to my north confessed that she had become afraid to go out to her garden. She always felt like she was being watched or stalked while out there. That same spring, a Boy Scout troop took their annual canoe trip up the river that flows through the area. They were scared by loud vocalizations along the way and, consequently, never went back. The following spring, I heard the groaning sounds again, this time not as loud and coming from the opposite direction. I dismissed them as a possible cow in distress. I called the farmer who owned the land adjacent to me and told him what I'd heard. He just laughed at me and said that he had sold all his livestock months earlier. My brother lives between me and the area from which the noise was. Hoping to blame his dogs, I asked him, "What the hell is wrong with your dogs?" He replied that the dogs were cowering under the front deck and wouldn't come out. As of February 2024, the activity continues. Thanks for reading. Signed, William. And there it is. All I have for this time. What'd you think about these experiences? I'm always eager to read your comments, and if you've ever seen something that you can't explain or maybe had a brush with the unknown and would like to share, send me an email to the address in the description, and your story just may make it into a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. And as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.